Thank you for joining us today for Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our Webinar Wednesday program, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. We are uncovering each part of the DFARS, or Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. As you know, the DFARS are the rule books for contracting with the Defense Department, and we have been moving sequentially, and we started with Part 201 in January, and we will be finishing with Part 253 in December. Our webinars are every Wednesday and are provided complimentary. They are recorded and can be downloaded from our website and YouTube channel, which now holds over 450 of our government contracting webinars. In the interest of time, we do not take questions, so if you do have questions for our speaker, we will have his information on the last slide of the presentation today. And a special thanks to our educational sponsor, the National Veterans Small Business Coalition, for making these webinars possible. The NVSBC is the largest nonprofit trade association for veterans. Please visit their website for more information. Virginia PTAC at GMU offers free one-on-one counseling to firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. If you are interested in learning more, please use the link provided to explore what PTAC can offer. Set Aside Alert provides up-to-date news, information, and opportunities for small business federal contractors. Their daily opportunities alerts assure you won't miss important sources, sought, and solicitation announcements, providing details you can jump on the hot ones. Every 2 weeks, they deliver concise breaking news, events, regulations, and teaming opportunities. And please join the Reston Chamber of Commerce Government Contractors Council for regular meetings. Please contact Alicia Fields with the email shown on your screen if you do have any questions. Federal contracting is a relationship game. Now, get in front of your federal human sooner with the exclusive Players and Layers method from Judy Bratt and Some Insight. Connect with her on LinkedIn and find out more, or visit growfedbiz.com today. And if you're interested in selling to the federal government, you may need a contract vehicle. The most popular one is the GSA schedule. Learn more about the requirements, the proposal process, and how this contract vehicle may or may not be the right tool for you. Jennifer Schaus is teaching a series of classes, as you can see here, with the Virginia PTAC and Mary Washington University. All classes are listed on our website under the events section with the registration link. Okay, and now a little bit about us. We work with U.S. federal government contractors, including product, service, and software firms. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and compliance. More information can be found on our website. We also have opportunities for your organization to advertise in our newsletter. We now reach over 23,000 subscribers, and this includes both contractors and government. Contact us for pricing information with the email shown on your screen. I also wanted to inform you of a new series that we're holding this year in 2021. We have launched a monthly series called the GovCon Live Q&A Cafe, and this is a live webinar series held each month that will take place on the second Friday of each month in 2021 at 12 p.m. Eastern. We have assembled a group of 4 panelists who are subject matter experts on a specific federal contracting topic. The panelists will make a short presentation about the topics listed here on your screen, and then take your live questions about that specific topic. So for example, our panelists covered team agreements last month, and this week on May 14th, our panelists will be covering subcontracting. Our panelists include attorneys, consultants, and other industry professionals, and you can sign up on our website under the Q&A Cafe tab. Sponsorships are available. Please email hello@jenniferschaus.com for a media kit with pricing details. Also, I wanted to note that you can use code DFARS for a $15 discount on each of these webinars. Okay, and now to introduce our speaker, Ed Delisle. Welcome, Ed. We are glad to have you here with us today, and I'll now turn the floor over to you.
All right, Hunter, thank you very much. Welcome everyone for attending this afternoon. I'm Ed Delisle. I'm the chairperson of the Government Contracting Practice Group at my law firm, Offutt Kerman, and I'm speaking to you today from suburban Philadelphia. Today, our topic, if we can advance the slide, is DFARS Part 219, Small Business Programs. We'll spend probably just in excess of 30, maybe 35 minutes talking about this subject today. If we can advance the slide. All right, so let's get started. So for purposes of getting started, going all the way back to the beginning and discussing the basics is always a good place. Generally speaking, there are what I like to call loaner agencies. So those agencies that do not follow the federal acquisition regulation. You have agencies like the United States Postal Service, the Federal Airline Administration, the FAA, where those agencies' regulations serve as the salutary voice when it comes to how those agencies buy things. That's not so in the majority of cases. In most cases, the FAR serves as the foundation and the supplemental agency regulations add to, but do not contradict what the FAR sets forth as appropriate when it comes to the government's desire to buy goods or services. In the case of the Department of Defense, of course, the Department of Defense is a FAR-based agency, and its regulations do in fact supplement what the FAR indicates is appropriate or required depending upon the circumstances. All right, Hunter, if you can advance the slide. Okay, so because the Department of Defense is a FAR-based agency, what this series that Jennifer Schaus and Associates has been covering is how the DFARS impact the procurement process outlined by the FAR, which means, at least as part of our discussion today, we'll need to understand a little bit about the section of the FAR that's being supplemented here, which is FAR Part 19, and it's being supplemented, of course, by DFARS Part 219. So let's start today's discussion with an understanding as to what's being supplemented, and what we'll do is hop sort of back and forth between the FAR and the relevant DFARS section so we can better understand exactly how the FAR is being supplemented by those portions of DFAR Part 219 that do in fact apply. So under FAR Part 19, again, to lay the foundation, this particular FAR section pertains to the SBA's small business programs and generally implements the acquisition-related sections of the Small Business Act and the Armed Services Procurement Act. There's also a reference in the FAR of executive orders that are pertinent to the small business programs and their implementation. The FAR sets forth the roles and responsibilities of procuring agencies and the SBA as it relates to small business programs and the various set-aside programs that they pertain to. And this particular section of the FAR and DFAR Part 219 are really directed to the contracting side of the house and how procurements should be conducted, particularly, obviously, as it relates to small business, versus other sort of sections of the FAR and the DFARS, which are more premised upon what contractors themselves can and cannot do. This particular section of the FAR and its supplement, DFARS Part 219, are really directed toward contracting personnel and what's appropriate as far as the implementation of the various different small business programs that are a part of FAR Part 19 and DFARS Part 219. And what you see here at the bottom of the slide is really what this is all about. It's to provide the maximum practicable opportunities to small businesses that fall within the various different categories that you see here on the screen. And just to provide some additional foundation and understanding as to what we're talking about, every year the SBA issues a scorecard indicating how agencies have done in terms of their small business procurement efforts. The latest report, which I believe actually comes from 2019, I don't know if I've seen a 2020 report yet, but as of 2019, the SBA's scorecard indicates that 26.5% of all money spent went to small business. That's based on a goal of 23%. And that 26.5% represents $133 billion or thereabouts in federal government spend. And if anybody's interested in taking a look at the individual statistics, the SBA does post its scorecards on its website. You can find it there. Of those dollars spent, the percentages that were allocated, the 26.5% for women-owned small businesses, they ended up at 5.19%, which exceeded the 5% goal for WSBs and ED WSBs, which I believe was the first time that the government has exceeded its goals for women-owned small businesses. For 8A companies, based upon the scorecard, the goal was 5%, and 8A companies ended up at 10.29%, so they did the best. SDVOSBs, Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Businesses, came in at 4.39%, which beat the goal established for it, which was 3%. And the one category of small business that's identified in FAR Part 19 and DFARS Part 219 that failed to reach its goal was the Hub Zone group, which came in at 2.28%. The goal there was 3%. And for those of you that follow this sort of thing, the hub zone regulations, the SBA's regulations pertaining to hub zones were recently altered, at least in part for the purpose of allowing hub zone companies to stay compliant such that these numbers can be achieved, these goals can be achieved. All right, so this is what we're really talking about today. It's procurement for small business and how contracting personnel can seek and obtain numbers that are consistent with the goals that are set forth for these various different categories of small business. Okay, Hunter, if you can advance the slide. Okay, so who's responsible within an agency for purposes of assuring that these goals are achieved and that the programs are advanced? Well, it's basically contracting officers, chiefs of contracting. They're the ones who are responsible for implementing the programs within their specific activities, including the achievement of the program goals that we just talked about. And they're also responsible for ensuring that their contracting and technical personnel understand what the requirements are and take action, reasonable action to increase participation. Now, as part of FAR Part 19, there's an awful lot in there regarding the interplay between FAR-based agencies and the SBA in terms of implementing the small business programs that are identified within FAR Part 19 and also DFARS Part 219. And we're going to talk a little bit about that this afternoon. But part of the ensuring that contracting and technical personnel understand what's required is this interplay with SBA. There is technical training and that sort of thing that is provided through SBA, many times through procurement center representatives, PCRs. And the whole idea is to assure that the goals, again, that we just talked about are achieved. And for purposes of DoD specifically, DFARS 219-201 required the appointment of a director of office of the Office of Small Business Programs, and each of the agencies within DoD has a director. And these directors are charged with overseeing the implementation of the procurement procedures that are designed to provide these opportunities for small business, and they're very good. I've been lucky enough to have gotten to know some of them. Kim Bueller is currently serving in that role for the Army, and she's great. She's very involved in what the Army does from a small business procurement perspective. And her group, the deputies beneath her, the contracting activity small business specialists that work with contracting to develop opportunities, solicitations for small business, are great. They're very involved in what the Army does. And I know the Navy and DIA, I've had the opportunity to meet the folks that are in charge there as well, and they do a great job. And they're very much involved in both what the contracting side within their agencies, what they do, as well as in many instances, PCRs and other folks at SBA in assuring that all of these programs are administered appropriately. Okay, if we can advance the slide. Okay, staying with some DoD subpart 219-201, which we were just referring to on the prior slide. The specialists within DoD have particular functions, and all of the work that they do, the recommendations that they make in connection with the issuance of solicitations, the discussions, the work that's done in connection with contracting is done early for the most part. It's done as part of acquisition planning, which is covered under FAR Part 7. It's done as part of market research. It's FAR Part 10, and the corollaries, of course, on the DoD side of the house, the DFARS. All of that is a part of what the contracting activity business specialists are involved in, and it's their job to assure that the contracting folks, the contracting officers, the chiefs of contracting that are involved in the procurement process understand what small businesses are out there and what they're capable of for purposes of appropriately assembling and issuing these solicitations. As part of what they do, they are responsible for referring recommendations to issue particular opportunities on behalf of small businesses that have been rejected by the contracting officer to the SBA PCRs. That does happen. That's part of their responsibility. So they'll determine, for example, that let's say a hub zone, 2 or more hub zone companies are appropriate for a particular opportunity. And that information is presented to a contracting officer. The contracting officer may reject it. SBA can become involved as part of that process through a referral from the small business specialist to the PCR for purposes of determining whether or not that was an appropriate thing to do. So the way. The other thing that the DoD Office of Small Business Programs does through DoD subpart 219-201 is conduct annual reviews to assess effectively how well the agency, the DoD agency that we're talking about, whether it's the Army, the Navy, et cetera, is doing in terms of providing opportunities to small businesses within the programs that they administer. One of the things that they cover, and this is a really important topic, is the extent of consolidation and the impact of consolidation on the availability of opportunities for small business. And consolidation is something that's been discussed more and more of late. The last number of years, you've seen lots of consolidation, and there are lots of theories behind why that is. And not only do you see consolidation, but a subset of consolidation, which is called bundling. You've seen an awful lot of that too, and bundling concerns more of instances where you have historically 2 separate opportunities where you had small businesses operating independent of one another. So they have independent contracts to do whatever it is that they're doing. And it's for whatever reason, those opportunities are bundled into one, making the one opportunity too large for small business. And of course, that means that there's less of an opportunity there for small business to participate. And what DoD does through DFARS section 219.201 is provide a report to Congress each year, and they let Congress know how they're doing in terms of consolidation, bundling, and then the flip side of that, whether or not they are providing a sufficient amount of work for small business. And if the report card that we talked about a little while ago would suggest that, in fact, things are fine. And in many respects, they are. But one of the things that has occurred over the last few years in particular, you have fewer and fewer small businesses receiving larger and larger contracts, which means that these opportunities are tending to get larger, and only larger smalls are qualifying for those opportunities. Not to say that there aren't plenty of opportunities for smaller businesses. There are, and you can debate the issue. But these reports to Congress that are required through the DFARS are designed to bring at least some of this to light so that it can be discussed, and it is a requirement of the regulations. All right, if we can advance the slide. All right, so let's talk a little bit about FAR subpart 19.3 and the DFARS sections that pertain to it. So FAR subpart 19.3, determination of small business size and status for small business. So the question is where a DoD agency has determined that an opportunity is appropriate for small business, how is contracting assured that an offeror is small? And that's what this really discusses here. And generally speaking, the DFARS section that are pertinent to 19.3 are consistent with the FAR. Generally speaking, an offeror is going to indicate as part of its offer to the government that it's small, and they have a responsibility to provide that information in good faith. That good faith representation isn't binding on the SBA, which ultimately can determine either by a referral directly from the contracting officer or through a size or status protest from a disappointed offeror, whether or not, in fact, that representation is accurate. And if it's not accurate and it's been misrepresented, of course, there are ramifications with respect to that. Regarding long-term contracts, there is a DFARS reference specifically with respect to that, as it relates to long-term contracts, which mean contracts that exceed 5 years. There is guidance provided within the DFARS in terms of how contracting personnel can identify that within the federal procurement data system, FPDS, which is used, even though there's been lots of consolidation, it continues to be used for purposes of government reporting, so that folks can understand exactly how the government is buying things and that sort of thing. And the DFARS section that's pertinent to determination of size specifically discusses how contracting personnel are to report that within FPDS. All right, so that's important. If we can please advance the slide. So with respect to, again, we're staying within 19.3, determination of small business size and status. If there is some sort of a challenge of some kind, a size or a status protest, it's up to the contracting officer upon receipt to refer that to the SBA for review and determination. And this really goes part and parcel with the entirety of FAR Part 19 and DFARS Part 219, where you have the SBA and the agency, in this case the Department of Defense, working with one another for purposes of ensuring that small businesses are provided with appropriate opportunities to perform, and that in fact these businesses, in the case of this particular area, are small. And for purposes of timeliness with respect to that, contracting officers should be receiving protests to that extent, assuming that they're coming from a disappointed offeror within 5 business days after bid opening, and that's for purposes of protesting size or status. Okay, if we can advance the slide. Okay, so as we had stated that, generally speaking, the DFARS are follow completely FAR subpart 19.3 as it relates to determination of small business size. There is a specific reference at DFARS subpart 219.303 that's a little bit different. So there is no FAR subpart 19.303. It's reserved. It's identified as reserved, but there is a DFARS 219.303, and within that particular DFARS section, contracting officers are told to follow this July 21, 2010 policy memorandum as it relates to the selection of NAICS codes. And you might want to ask yourself, wait a minute, what does the selection of a NAICS code have to do with determining small business size and status? Well, the whole point of sort of this, what we see in DFAR subpart 219.303 is the importance of size to NAICS code. Okay, so obviously we know that NAICS codes can come with different size standards, and based on what those size standards are, certain businesses might qualify as small for purposes of one opportunity or not. Again, just simply depending on upon what NAICS code is selected by the contracting officer. And the problem that you will sometimes run into is you have hundreds of these NAICS codes. You can have more than one that could apply, and they have different standards. So, for example, general building construction, NAICS code 236220. That carries a size status ceiling of $39.5 million. Specialty trade, say specialty trade construction, say 238.220. That's plumbing and HVAC. That carries a size standard of $16.5 million. So if something could be one versus the other, as you can see, there's a huge difference between the two. And the idea here is to make sure from a DoD perspective that contracting officers are very careful in following this policy memorandum in the selection of a NAICS code so that the most appropriate NAICS code is selected for purposes of assuring that small businesses can in fact are adequately represented as part of that opportunity, if at all possible. And in reaching that conclusion, generally the policy memorandum follows the SBA's regulations, and you'll see a reference to the primary regulation there, 13 CFR 121.402B. And the idea is that as part of this process of selecting a NAICS code, the contracting officer should at least in part be consulting with the small business specialists within their agency that are assigned to them, and also in conjunction with the SBA. And the SBA will often play a role as part of that process. Okay, we can advance the slide. Okay, still within FAR subpart 19.3, there and the corollary to that DFAR subpart 219. There is a subpart 309 that instructs contracting officers to include the contract provision that you see here if the opportunity is going to be particularly big. So if based upon the size of a particular opportunity, if the estimated value, for example, is going to exceed the applicable NAICS code for the work that's indicated, then the contract clause that's indicated here must be included within the opportunity to provide notice to the small business contractor that, hey, this could be a problem for you. Not that 1 year necessarily or one opportunity necessarily will result in a company becoming other than small under the Runway Extension Act, which is in place until January of next year, of 2022. Its size is based on average annual receipts over either 3 years or 5 years. But nonetheless, for Department of Defense opportunities, if it's a particularly large opportunity for small business, there's a warning provided to small business so that they understand that it's a particularly large opportunity and to just be aware of that. Okay, if we can advance the slide. Okay, so switching gears, under FAR subpart 19.4, cooperation with the SBA. As we've talked about already a little bit, a lot of what FAR Part 19 and DFARS Part 219 cover are coordination efforts between the agency and the SBA. The need to, essentially what happens here is there's this need to coordinate with the PCRs who will be provided access to proposed contracting actions and can make recommendations to a contracting officer regarding that contracting officer's decision on how it wants to buy something. Oh, I think you should maybe set this one aside for 8A companies, for example, or hub zone companies. And that interaction goes back and forth. And a lot of what FAR Part 19 talks about is that process and that interrelationship. However, there are certain procurements that are excluded from consideration. And DFARS subpart 219.402 talks about some of those. And basically, if an opportunity is one being performed overseas in conjunction with another government in support of a military operation of some kind, or is governed by the Foreign Military Sales Program, FMS, then there's no need for the Department of Defense to necessarily coordinate its procurement efforts with the SBA. Not that it can't happen, but there are other statutes, agreements, or regulations that are going to take precedence over that. So it doesn't necessarily have to happen. All right, so just something to be aware of. Okay, if we can advance the slide. So generally, shifting to FAR subpart 19.5 and what the DFARS cover with respect to set aside and partial set aside contracts. I mean, generally, under FAR Part 19, subpart 19.5, this FAR provision allows for contracting to fashion procurements such that competitions are between similarly situated small businesses like hub zones, 8As, et cetera. And generally speaking, there's no preference of one type of small business versus another, other than straight small business. Straight small business kind of gets shaft as part of all of this. All of the other programs are deemed to be more important than straight small business, and the regulations are pretty consistent about that. And generally speaking, for purposes of competition, for each one of the programs, Hub Zone, WASB, SDVOSB, Hub Zone, they're all going to generally require a Rule of Two analysis. Each one of the programs has something in the regulations pertinent to that. So all of that is fine and well, but there are certain times they're identified within the DFARS where set aside opportunities won't happen, and you see this in the DFARS perhaps more so than you see in other agency supplemental regulations, where you have treaties or agreements of some type that come into play and impact procurements in some way, shape, or form. You see that here. So set-asides for supplies covered by the U.S. Canadian Defense Development Sharing Program are not to be set aside. You have DFARS subpart 219.502.2, which identifies specific areas where, for all intents and purposes, contracting must set aside the opportunities unless there's a justification not to. So for construction, including maintenance and repairs, anything under $3 million, that's going to be set aside in some way, shape, or form. Dredging under $1.5 million, and architectural engineering services under $1 million. And just to sort of provide a little bit more context, so the simplified acquisition procedures of FAR Part 13, which cover opportunities between the micro purchase threshold, which is currently 10,000, not including COVID. COVID related stuff, it's 30,000, and the ceiling for the threshold, the simplified acquisition threshold of 250,000. Anything between those two numbers, 10,000, 250,000, that's automatically reserved for small business. Here under DoD, you have an extension of that for small business, where you're going to, it could be either sole source, and we're going to talk about sole sourcing in just a little bit. But you have, at the very least, the ability, if you're a small business, to be able to compete at these levels for contracts that fall below them. Okay, if we can advance the slide. Okay, so under FAR subpart 9.6, there's this whole issue of certificates of competency and responsibility issues. And there's some DoD guidance with respect to that. Generally speaking, when it comes to responsibility determinations, that's going to be an administrative function of the contracting personnel that are in charge of a small business set-aside contract of some type. And for those that are interested, it's really hard to try to protest something like that. I have people, come to me all the time, hey, I don't think that this particular company is qualified for one reason or another. They don't have the facilities, the equipment, et cetera. Generally speaking, it's going to be tough to win a challenge like that, because it's really within the purview of contract administration. And in particular, as it relates to small business, it's going to be tough because the SBA becomes involved, and only the SBA can issue a certificate of competency when the contracting officer has some question about the potential responsibility of a small business contractor and asks for assistance from the SBA with respect to that. The procedure that the Department of Defense will go through is, for purposes of this, is set forth in DFARS subpart 219.602, which you see referred to here. And if you go to acquisition.gov, which I recommend to everyone if they're interested in going through the FAR and the various different agency supplemental regulations, you'll see all of them there at acquisition.gov. And you can click through. It's all hypertext link, which is great. It's what I use when I'm going to go check out the FAR, the DFARS, that sort of thing. But you'll see a reference in DFARS subpart 219.602 to something called a PGI, Procedure Guidance and Information. And it's, for all intents and purposes, it's part of the DFARS. It's just a separate procedure you can click through and view. And in this particular instance, there is one that relates to certificates of competency and what the contracting officer is to do as part of a process like that, and challenging or asking about responsibility of a small business. Okay, if we can advance the slide. Small business subcontracting programs. So generally, what this FAR section 19.7 pertains to is the requirements associated with subcontracting plans and how contracting personnel are to assemble and review these plans. I mean, there's been an awful lot written about and reported on regarding agencies' failure to police this process appropriately. So the Department of Defense came up with its own system to make it easier to police these types of issues in certain circumstances. And you see that here. It's set forth under DFARS subpart 219.702.70, where larger primes can come up with a sort of a global small business plan for all their contracts. And there are there's lots of debate as to whether or not it makes it easier. I mean, DoD certainly believes that it's easier to have one in place as opposed to having multiple plans submitted on a contract by contract basis, which makes total sense, at least to me. But there are ramifications if a company fails to comply with the requirements that it has committed to as part of its plan, and that can ultimately result in liquidated damages and the need to submit appeals on behalf of the company who's been assessed liquidated damages and that sort of thing. But the point of this slide is the fact that this DFARS section exists, and there are subcontracting plan possibilities for larger primes that don't exist elsewhere for other agencies. Okay, if we can advance the slide. Staying within the confines of FAR subpart 19.7, DFAR subpart 219.704, again, talking about subcontracting plan requirements, it does allow for a prime, larger prime, to replace a small business with an other than small subcontractor, as long as the administrative contracting officer is notified in writing within a reasonable time after award. So that's possible. And there are lots of different reasons why that might end up being necessary, but there's a mechanism for it. DFARS 219.705-4 allows or requires, based on how it's worded, the contracting officer to challenge a subcontracting plan where the goals don't comport with with the goal, where the plan doesn't comport with the goals set forth in the opportunity. So, for example, if within the plan the large business concern says that it intends to subcontract 2% of its subcontracts to women-owned small businesses, but the goal is 3%. That's the sort of thing that we're talking about here. And DFARS 219.705-4 indicates that any small disadvantaged business goal of less than 5% must be approved one level above the contracting officer. And we're generally talking about 8A companies there. And there are PGIs. We talked about PGIs just a few moments ago, procedures, guidance, and information within this particular DFARS section, which identifies for contracting officers and other contracting personnel within DoD how they're to review plans and subcontracting reports. Okay, if we can advance the slide. Okay, the most comprehensive of the programs identified in FAR Part 19 relates to the 8A program, and that's primarily based upon the need for SBA approval to release an opportunity from the 8A program once it's in there. It's like that commercial, you know, it goes in, but it doesn't come out, like that kind of thing. It's the only one where you have that sort of a requirement, and it's based upon the regulatory framework that's built around the 8A program, which is, it's a little bit different than some of the others. I think based primarily on the fact that it's maybe one of the older programs out there. There is a, we keep talking about this partnership between SBA and the agency. Well, there's a specific reference to that partnership within subpart 219.800, particularly as it relates to the 8A program. So there's a partnership agreement between the Department of Defense and the SBA as it pertains to 8A contracts and the ability for DoD to enter into those contracts independent of the SBA for all intents and purposes, you know, for those companies that are eligible participants. It effectively allows the SBA to independently conduct competitions and sign contracts with 8A companies without as much involvement with SBA by virtue of the agreement. Generally speaking, Department of Defense has to keep SBA in the loop and allow the SBA to interject if it deems it necessary, but it provides DoD with more freedom to enter into contracts with 8A companies versus companies that are eligible through some of the other programs that are available. Okay, if we can advance a slide. Okay, sticking with the 8A aspect of FAR subpart 19.8 and what the DFARS sort of speak to in that regard. So there is a specific reference to Native Hawaiian organizations at DFARS subpart 219-805-1 in NHOs. And it indicates in that DFARS section that the SBA is permitted to accept sole source contracts on behalf of those organizations if they exceed the competitive thresholds identified by the FAR, which generally speaking is $7.5 million for manufacturing NAICS codes and $4.5 million for all others. So what that basically means is that there are opportunities for most. We talked about this a few moments ago. For other program participants, HubZone, WASB, SDVOSB, to obtain sole source contracts below the thresholds that you're seeing here. But for 8A participants, and in particular, Native Hawaiian organizations, Indian tribes, and Alaskan Native corporations, the sole source contracts can be more than that. And we're going to take a look and see how much more than that momentarily. The same can hold true for other 8A firms, but for the most part, there's sort of a special emphasis on NHOs, ANCs, and Indian tribes, and we're going to see that now here in a second if we can advance the slide. So, okay, so as we see here, okay, so in the FAR, as it relates to the companies that I just identified, the SBA may not accept for negotiation a sole source 8A contract that exceeds $25 million unless the requesting agency has completed the justification. While under the DFARS corollary to that, it goes up to $100 million. Okay, and so there's been an awful lot of talk about this over the years, but this is a sort of a special instance where there's kind of like a big difference. So it's a supplement to the FAR, but it's kind of an important one, and it's one that again, if you're running small business circles and if you do a lot of work with 8A companies and other small companies for that matter, this is one where there ends up being an awful lot of discussion. So just so you know, and you're aware, we can advance the slide. So as it relates to all of these other programs, there are no real differences in terms of how the DFARS treat the application of the SBA's programs to what DoD does. DoD will basically review how competitions were done historically, the goals and how they've been adhered to over time or not. As part of acquisition planning and consistent with market research, they'll fashion contracting opportunities to benefit each one of these programs, such that the maximum number of opportunities are provided for small business, and this is going to be done in conjunction with contracting, the small business personnel that are assisting contracting within DoD, and then the SBA where applicable. All right, we can advance the slide. So the last thing I want to talk about here is DFARS subpart 219.71. So the Department of Defense does have its own mentor protege program, and it's the oldest of the mentor protege programs that are out there within the context of the federal government. It was recently extended to run through what was extended by the NDA of 2020. I think it runs through 2024 currently. It's different than the SBA's mentor protege program, where the primary focus is more so on joint venturing based on the exceptions to affiliation that are set forth in the SBA's regulations. Here, mentors can receive reimbursement and credit towards subcontracting goals for development assistance that they provide to their proteges. But the primary focus is more on small businesses performing as subcontractors and assistance provided by mentors to small businesses who are acting as subcontractors. So it's a different sort of a program than what the SBA provides, but it's been there for quite some time. It's still there. And despite the consolidation of all the mentor protege programs within government, it continues to be there and to be used. And generally speaking, the contracting officer's responsibilities with respect to how it's administered are identified in DFAR 219-7103-2, which is primarily focused on assuring that there's a mechanism by which mentors can be compensated for the developmental assistance that they provide. All right, if we can advance the slide. All right, and that's what I have for you today. I very much appreciate everyone attending. If you do have any questions, my information is there. Please feel free to contact me.
Thank you, Ed, for a great presentation and for sharing your time with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this webinar. The recording will be on our website and YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. And please join us next week as we cover more parts of the DFARS.